Start with, I would just briefly tell you what exactly would behavioral and social sciences cover. It's something to do with, the cognition and behavior of humans. Of course, this applies to the animals as well. But here in this particular domain, we would be targeting at the human behavior and how it would affect the human health. So this is going to be something related to that and what all domains can be captured with respect to the social sciences or social behavior of humans. Now, to start with, this particular field would address three things. One is human behavior, as in real-time situations, how would people behave, or in virtual settings, how people actually react to something. The next domain that you people would be kind of seeing is decision making, wherein what is the consumer behavior, what is the behavior towards a particular stressor, what is the coping strategy, how people would kind of decide as to what type of wearable device to choose, or how autism autism children would be kind of making a decision based on the available resources that they have. So this would be something that would be covered by the behavioral and social sciences domain. And the most important is social interactions, wherein which is embedded in the human behavior, and it allows people to kind of go for decision making, thereby resulting in social interactions. These are very important domains considering the times that we are living in. So in terms of behavioral and social sciences, social interactions become very important because that is where your network analysis would begin in. For any domain that we would pick up, whether it is cognitive, whether it is psychological, these social interactions become very important. Now, these three are the pillars of understanding behavioral and social sciences. To start with, when we look at these three domains kind of converge and they interact cross-sectionally and would lead to an overall holistic understanding of behavioral sciences. Now, when we look at the drivers, as in how would these three pillars be affected or embedded in the system? So there are three drivers that you would actually, that one needs to actually understand or, cover. There's a cognitive aspect, which kinds of understands the cognitive aspects of the human behavior. Then the social drivers, which would include the social interactions or maybe the societal norms, or maybe the parent children interactions, or maybe the teacher student interactions, or maybe the interactions that we have on virtual platforms or the social media platforms, such as when one would try to develop tools that are there to kind of assess the mental health of an individual. So if I'm, kind of posting every day on my social media and I'm trying to assess, based on my text or the images that I post, what is the state of my mental health? So one would need to understand the social context of it and then try to understand my behavior and the cognitive health. The last is the environmental, how environment would play a role in the behavioral aspects of an individual. Environment can include the microenvironment, as in the environment within the brain, or environment could be something which is external to the human body. Now, when we say external to the human body, this may include the effect of air pollution. This may include education. Education would again be an environment, external environment. Environment could be again the impact of certain anomalies on me. So these would be covered in the environmental aspect. So these three drivers, when they encompass the entire behavioral and social sciences, they're covered in the three domains, as I just said, either human behavior or decision making or social interactions. So these three drivers are important. So when you have a research question, you kind of have six keywords now: the cognitive aspects of human behavior, the social aspects of human behavior, the environmental aspects of human behavior, or human existence, or human domains, encompassing the three other keywords, that is decision making, interactions, and behavior. So these 6 words are going to be very important for everybody to understand behavioral sciences or social sciences. Now, when it comes to the subdomains, in the entire subject area, when we kind of place different domains, what exactly would all be covered in this particular subject area? One is neuropsychology, wherein the person may try to address the psychological behavior in the neurological terms. In the neuroimaging aspects, say for example, if there is a tumor involved, which kinds of affects the moods or the behaviors or the way I would be predisposed to stressors, or maybe Parkinson's disease, or maybe Alzheimer's disease. So neuroimaging would play an important aspect in covering the behavioral and social sciences. There's the cognitive aspects, of course, in terms of understanding cognition with respect to maybe education, or occupation. Say you cannot compare the cognition of a potter with the cognition of a weaver, or cognition of a white collar person. So these domains of cognitive aspects also are covered in the subdomains of the behavioral and social sciences. Then the behavioral patterns. Behavioral patterns are very important. I just gave you an example as in how I would place my texts or my images on the social media every day. And over time, over interrupted time series, I would try to analyze how my postings on social media with respect to the use of key terms, keywords, they're embedded in my behavioral patterns, and that would kind of make me dive into the aspects of the common mental disorders, or maybe depression, such as depression or anxiety, these aspects. Then if I would look at the other pattern of behavioral sciences, then in this domain would be the social withdrawal. Maybe suddenly then I would have to kind of delve into the aspects of social withdrawal. So this domain is again covered into the behavioral sciences. Then is the learning aspect. And I would rather club learning aspect with psychology, because if I would have to understand the learning pattern, learning behavior of individuals, I would have to understand first what exactly is the psychology behind it. So these two domains I would rather want to club and try to understand. Now, when we say learning aspects, now if we would look at children who have ASD, autism spectrum disorder, now that it is an entire disorder. So there are 2-3 things that I would be exploring, which would be cognition, which would again be neuropsychology, which would be learning. So these 3-4 things clubbed together would help me understand the learning patterns, and the domains or the theoretical aspects, the theoretical frameworks would be embedded in the psychological aspects of it. Now, when I would look at these aspects of learning and psychology, these domains become important, because what we learn, whether it is the learning at the young adult stage, whether it is learning at the toddler stage, at the early age, or whether it is de-learning at a later age, this is going to be impactful. Now, when it's a de-learning would be something that would be experiential for people. If I know how to drive, and de-learning would be, I now have to stop driving because my vision is not proper, because I've aged. That is one thing. Now, de-learning would also be, I eat unhealthy diet. Now, I have to wear this Fitbit and de-learn the concepts, or de-learn my behavior with respect to eating pattern, with respect to my physical activity. So this is something that is very important, and kind of overlaps with other domains in the subject. There is the emotions. and neurodevelopment. When we talk about emotions, again, they're embedded in the behavioral pattern, they're embedded in the neuroimaging, they're embedded in neuropsychology. So this is something that overlaps with others, but emotions. When we talk about emotions, there would be children or there would be people who maybe, let us say, have Klinefelter syndrome or maybe any other condition. Okay, so when we say this, so they kind of express more of their emotions than more of their verbal, more of the speech. In addition to this, emotions are something that shape the entire behavioral pattern or shape the cognition of individuals. So if I would look at one culture, emotion expressing emotions of anger would require different words. Different words would be used. Whereas if I would move to another culture, those words would change, but the emotions remain same. So this again has to be embedded in the cognitive aspects of the society. When we look at these, we would try to address the various aspects of emotion. Let us say happiness. So can we really assess happiness? Maybe yes, maybe no. When I say I have to quantitatively measure emotions or happiness, I would have to develop a scale or a tool. And to develop a scale or tool, I need to design some experiments which are based on the people, on living people, and then try to assess whether the scale even fits or not, whether the scale of 0 to 10 or 0 to 100 even fits or not. So that is where the subject domain emotions work. Then again is the neurodevelopment. When I say neurodevelopment would include the landmarks or the developmental landmarks of the human behavior or the individual growth. So we know that a child is supposed to eat himself or herself by this particular age. The child is supposed to walk by this particular age. The child is supposed to speak by this particular age, express emotions. So these aspects are covered in the neurodevelopment. When I would say neurodevelopmental delays, it would mean that there is deviation from the standard norms of an individual's development cycle. So these aspects can be covered in the behavioral and social sciences. Now, when we take up projects or the studies in social and behavioral sciences, with respect to IRIS or the ISEF, you have to be innovative. There would be a lot of projects, there would be a lot of wearable devices, there would be a lot of algorithms, there would be a lot of apps that have been developed with respect to all the domains that we have just discussed. Now, when we say innovation is essential, because when you innovate, you kind of bring in an element of your own thought to the already existing problem. The problem is available. Say, for example, people with dementia would be forgetting things. So when they would forget things, let us say I develop an app which kinds of sends a reminder that you are to take your medications. Okay, take your medicine. So this is something that I would innovate. Now, there would be a lot of apps that would kind of send in reminders, but what component would I use? Now, maybe I would use a component of a speaker here, as in the speaker in the phone would give a reminder. Now, instead of just a text message or a drop-down message, now I have a speaker which is kind of giving me a prompt that I have to take my medications. So you have to bring in a component of innovation in your entire study when you would take up. Now, quickly going through it. Now, why innovation is required is, first is, as I just gave you a brief example, that you have to address the already existing problems. There won't be anything new. If somebody is thinking that I would identify a new problem, yes, you can identify a new problem which nobody has thought of, but there would be, ways to address that problem. Somebody in the other part of the globe has already addressed it. Now, the era that we are living in has collapsed in terms of the reach. So what you are thinking from your perspective that, that is something very innovative and nobody else has done. So then you would be mistaken. Somebody else in the other part of globe has already addressed that, but in a different way. So that is where you bring in your innovation component. Now, when we say addressing complex societal challenges, now these challenges could be anything that you come across in your daily life. Whether it could be inspired by your family, it could be inspired by your friend, or it could be inspired by a situation that you were in, or it could be inspired by somebody else who was in that situation. Now, giving a brief example, now when we, in the Western countries, when you cross a red light, when you traffic signal, then, there for blind people, there are now voice signals. So now you can cross the road. Please stop. So walk, cross the road. So these were somebody's innovations that were addressed to make the people, visually impaired people's life easy. That is where you address complex societal challenges, and that is where the component of behavior and social sciences would come in, because you're addressing a societal problem, and with behavioral sciences, you would try to address that challenge. Now, the next is the technological advancements and digital transformations. When we talk about these, we know that the big data science, the way machine learning is happening, the way programming and codings are happening, we already have technological advancements, and the way digital advancements are changing. This is something very important with respect to the changing behavior pattern, and how these advancements and transformations can bring about a change in people's lives. This is something to do with behavior. If there is a Fitbit available, but I don't want to use it. So, of course, this is a person's behavior. Even if you make me use that, do I really use it? Do I really look at the data obtained from it to change my eating pattern or to change my physical activity? Second example is when I would look at the technological advancements. I gave you an example for the people with dementia, that you would want to send in a reminder using a voiceover or using a speaker prompt. So this is something that you would require in terms of the technological advancements. With respect to digital transformations, probably the way we look at the data obtained and use machine learning and AI into understanding the patterns and behavior of a particular group of people, this would be important. Now, adapting to cultural and societal changes. Now, again, this is something very, cross-sectionally very important. Now that we are changing every day with respect to our behavior and the way cultures are changing across globe, across continents. So adapting to it would be important. Now, when I say adapting to it, adapting means the technological adaptation, the behavioral adaptation, or the normative adaptation of the society. Now, if I have to bring in people or children with neurodevelopmental delays to the mainstream, one of the reasons that I would want is that their parents should bring them in the mainstream, or parents should intervene at an early age so that at least they're diagnosed, at least they are screened by a trained physician or a clinician to kind of bring in that early intervention. They kind of start the medications early, they kind of diagnose it early, they use methods to develop their cognition. So this innovation would be important to adapt to the rapid cultural and societal change. Now then comes in the component of personal health interventions, because innovations would eventually be, useful at the individual level. At the societal level, of course, they would be important, and at the individual level. When you talk about the societal level interventions or societal level changes, then it would require an understanding at a bigger domain, how populations or cultures would react to it. At personalized health interventions, how a person would behave to the red and the green color, red and blue color. Maybe in my culture, red would mean something as danger. Maybe in somebody else, it would mean happiness. Just like some people wear white during the mourning period, while some people across cultures would wear white during the weddings. So this is nothing but, the individual level, the societal level behavior. When it comes to the individual level behavior, what I personally choose is that is the individual level. So same applies to the health interventions. When we talk about the societal health interventions, I would look at this community behavior change, as in how we can bring about a change in the community. At the personal health interventions, you target one particular individual, make the person wear a Fitbit or a spectacle or a device to improve my my vision or correct my speech. So that would be at the personal level. Now, this is something which translates itself into improving public policy and social programs. So when these interventions happen at the societal level, the society has a particular behavior towards it, and it would eventually lead to improving public policy. Now, when I say public policy, let us say there's a public policy of, program or a policy of vaccination, immunizing the children. So there were personalized health interventions. Each individual, each mother was told to go for immunization of her children, which led to the societal change, I mean, everybody has to go. And it led to a public policy, improvement in a public policy that there is 100% coverage for polio vaccination. So this becomes a public policy. Now, when I would give an example of neurodevelopmental delays or maybe autism spectrum disorder, let us say we have personalized interventions for these children, the speech therapy, eventually leading to an overall public policy that individuals with neurodevelopmental delays can be put into certain type of therapy, and then it becomes mandatory that all the individuals first should be undergoing, all the children should be undergoing these particular tests at this month of age. Their neurodevelopmental delays are assessed, and eventually we come out with a public policy, or we come out with innovations that impact public policy. Okay. Now, let us say I have a behavior of, not switching the fans off when I leave the room. Your intervention would be not the health intervention, but your intervention would be maybe give me a prompter just outside my house when I'm locking it, switch off your fan, switch off your fan. Okay. Now, this was an innovation that you developed, and it would impact the public policy. It would impact, the policy at climate change. So this would be something very important with respect to behavior and social sciences. Now, it could be health interventions, it could be behavioral interventions. Eventually, your target should be, adding your bit to a policy or to a program if your innovation is scaled up. When you would develop your projects, when you would develop your synopsis, you develop aiming it for maybe 50 people, 100 people, or maybe 500 people. Now, this program or the initiative or the wearable device or an intervention or a prototype that you develop should have the capacity of scaling up. Maybe at least you should have the vision that if I scale it up to 1,000 people or 2,000 people, it would bring about an impact on the society or a policy. So this particular aspect should be the final aim, final goal of your entire project. Now, since Shrey sir asked me to kind of touch upon the current trends and innovative areas with respect to behavioral and social sciences. Now, people work on, different aspects of behavioral and social sciences that I've just told are embedded in 6 keywords. Now you pick up any machine learning tool, pick up AI, pick up programming, pick up algorithms, natural language. So whatever you pick up would fit into those 6 domains, encompassing your need of innovation across these 5 domains, and you build up your areas, you build up your ideas. People are working left, right, and center with respect to these domains, and what you need to add is your bit of imagination, your bit of work, and the feasibility should be assessed. Now, let us say, focus on the global challenges. I just said you have to identify a societal problem. Societal problem could be for the visually impaired people. Societal problem could be for people with Parkinson's, dementia, people with neurodevelopmental delays or cognitive impairment. So these domains would be covered into, or mental health. These domains would be covered in the behavioral and social sciences, and you have to focus on the global challenges. So the most important is, first of all, you go through the sustainable development goals. Now, when you would go through the SDGs, there is right to health. Okay, when you would go to right to health or right to a clean environment. So these two domains, when you would go through them very rigorously, you would be able to fit in or identify, yes, this is the problem that probably I identified, and now I have to work on it. Say, for example, there have been students who have been working on, let us say, Parkinson's. So for them, it was a personal problem. Somebody in their family was affected from it, and they found it as a problem and started working on the solutions to it. And of course, there were already devices or prototypes or interventions available for it, but they added their bit of innovation component to it. So you have to first identify the global challenges. You have to go through the SDGs. What domains are there? And the most important domain that they also have addressed is behavior and mental health. So these two domains are very important even in the sustainable development goals. Now, I'll just give you a few examples, which of course should not be taken as it is. You have to be imaginative. You have to add in your components of innovation to it. Now, let us say we have digital mental health and AI-powered interventions. So if I would develop a mobile health app which help me screen for depression, so eventually there would be a lot of apps for it. Okay. Now, what I want to add in is, since I am already working on one aspect of it, so I'll give you example from there. And few are already available. So what happens is, somebody who now who looks at mental health would be screened by a trained psychiatrist or a psychologist. So they would be screened by these specialists. Now, considering the burden, now you have to identify a global challenge. There are people who are depressed and have suicidal tendencies. Now we know that depression is a big problem, again, is embedded in or places itself in one of the sustainable development goals. So I want to create a mobile health app for it. Now, people like me who are not psychiatrists or psychologists are not trained to use these apps. So in Indian scenario, the burden is huge. We know that a lot of suicides are happening. We know that a lot of people are depressed. And now I want to address this in terms of my health systems. So I know that there are very few people now for the 100 people, there is one psychiatrist oblique psychologist. One psychiatrist oblique psychologist oblique clinical psychologist. So 3 people, either of them is available for 100 people. For 1,000 people, there is only one psychiatrist for 1,000 people. Now placing this in my health system, I want to develop an app, a mobile health app, which would enable people to screen themselves for depression. Now, there would be a lot of apps available for screening depression. So what am I adding new to it is, maybe I build in a component of the scores. So I would be using a standard tool which is used to screen depression. I would use that tool, bring in the module of my mobile health app. And once I get the final score, let us say my score is 15 out of 26, and I'm at high risk of depression. So as a layman, as a person who is not a trained psychiatrist or a psychologist, how do I understand that thing? How do I understand that score? So you build in a component which is easily addressable, or which is easily understandable by the people. So bring in the system of the traffic signals. red, yellow, and green. So green is when there is no risk or minimal risk. Yellow is something where I have mild risk and I'm at mild or moderate risk of depression. And red is something where I would be at a very high risk of depression and I immediately need to see a therapist. Maybe a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So this is something everybody relates to a traffic signal. So I found a problem which was embedded in the society. It is a global challenge. Coming to Indian scenario, because you have to develop innovations, you have to bring in the component of innovations with respect to your own country, which is scalable to other countries. You can scale it up to other countries, but you have to localize it. That is where you would be able to think. Because if I bring in an app, a mobile health app, for which can only be used on Mac, so how many people are able to access Mac or iPhone in India? So that will be a bigger problem. So I develop an app which is Android based or Mac based. So that way I'll be able to address it or place it in the local context. Then bring in the component of innovation, assess the need of the people and apply it. So for this particular aspect, you first have to generate your evidence. So that is the formative assessment where all of you should be assessing the need of the need of a particular innovation for a particular problem. So identify the problem, then identify the need of innovation and the gap. So this will be your formative phase of assessment, and you will develop your innovations or projects to address the need or address the gap already available in the literature. Right? Now, moving from this, coming to the big data and computational social science. So when we talk about the big data, there are already available data sets which are in the domain, and you can use those data sets, or you kind of build in your own data sets and you use those computational programmings to model the dynamics or predict behavior. Predict behavior is just one small example of it. Okay, when you simulate, so for example, 2 years ago, we were working on one project which was based on one behavioral disorder, and it is a rare disorder. And when it was rare disorder, somebody in the other part of world had already worked on it, and some data was already available in the public domain that they had submitted in the public domain, as in the profile of the patients, as in their age, their gender, their education, and their time of blinking of eye. As in, if I blink normally, maybe 10 times in 1 minute, versus when you introduce an innovation or innovative therapy, and now I blink normally, maybe 30 times in one minute. So this data was already available. So the student worked on that available data, did simulations, and put in her innovation of understanding to what extent that intervention or innovation is actually predicting the behavior of blinking of eye. So if I would apply it to patients who have Parkinson's, who have Alzheimer's or dementia, so how many times do they blink in a minute and what is the outcome? So this is something that you can use your big data on. Now, this data can be available publicly or may have to be produced on your own experiments. So it depends on your research question that you would use big data. The next is neuroscience and behavior. When you would pick up behaviors, let us say decision making, or maybe fear, or maybe phobias, or anxiety. So at times, neuroimaging and neuroscience techniques are used. EEG is used, or fMRI is used to to understand the mechanisms that underlie these behaviors. Now, when I say anxiety, there would be frames of it. I would not be into a constant anxious state. So it will not be useful. So it would bring in a lot of data or huge data set for one particular individual. Say, for example, if you would want to work on sleep cycle. So sleep cycle would be something that would have huge data set in an entire 8-hour sleep duration. And if you assess that sleep data with respect to the brain activity, with respect to cognition of a particular individual, let us say how cognition is affected by sleep. And you put an EEG on my brain, I sleep at night, and you collect the real-time data and you work on my data set. So I am one individual for you. Similarly, you work on 10 people. Collect EEG data during sleep and imagine the amount of data that you would get in EEG. Now, you assess my cognitive behavior or cognitive impairment and you collate everything. Then you work on it. So neuroimaging and neurosciences techniques would work on these aspects. Now, health, behavior, and lifestyle interventions, this is something that I've already given an example of. So you bring in the component of mHealth or build in prototypes. I've just given Fitbit and Apple Watch because they were somebody's innovations to real time, to track people in real time with respect to their health behavior. Health behavior as in the walking behavior, the eating behavior, their heart rate, their pulse rate. So all these aspects. And now we have wearable device to even assess your blood pressure. So this is something that has been added to it. Now, when I would say eating behavior would include 3D movement of my hand towards my mouth and then plate. Again, repeat and same. So the watch would address that and say that you've eaten these many times. No. So these aspects would be covered in the health behavior. Now, cultural neuroscience, again, when I say cognition, emotional process, maybe I'm under fear, I have some phobia, or maybe I'm, assessing somebody's cognition, and how neuroimaging would help to understand these cultural experiences. Now, again, as I said, emotional process. When you would go across cultures, when you would go across different cultures, emotion is something which is subjective to that particular culture. When you would go to, let us say, the culture of people who are into very professional business, very high profile business, who are public figures, versus a person who is situated in a forest in a tribal area. Now, let us say somebody dies in their family. So how a person, that public figure, would behave in public with respect to, crying or mourning or grief, compared to a person, a common man situated in a tribal area or a community like us, and how that person would behave to the emotion of grief. And this difference of behavior across two different cultures addressed or understood through neuroimaging. So this is again something to do with behavioral and social sciences. Then again, digital footprints through machine learning. Now you can predict behaviors, you can assess mental health trends. As I gave you an example, there was this project of that we had around 2 years ago, wherein this this girl, she kind of assessed the behavior of children, the posts available on the text available. She didn't do it on the images, the text available. People post the text in the social media, not in their WhatsApp chats. And based on that, she assessed the mental health of the individual. So these are the aspects that you can cover. Now, aging and longevity, I give an example of a wearable device, maybe a spectacle that kind of reminds me constantly of certain things, as in, um, I'll just give you an example. Shresa would be able to tell you better. But then, we had a project which had a camera fitted in the spectacles of a person with dementia, and the map of the house map, the house map was fed into the system, and based on the AI and based on the machine learning, the the prompts were available that if a person forgets where the person kept the pen or the paper, or maybe a book that the person was reading. So it would remind that person to go through the entire data set of his house map, house planning, and wherever the person has put the angle of the spectacles, the camera fitted into it, to identify or remind the person that your pen is there, your shoes are there. So this is something that you can, use for the aging population. Now, when it's a aging population, there would be various domains that you can address. You can address Parkinson's, you can address Alzheimer's, you can address dementia, you can address gait in aging people. You can address the exercise pattern in aging people. So this would be something very important, considering that 40% of the world population would be into the higher bracket of the age group by 2030. So this domain would be very important for everybody to explore. Then again, we have the analysis of complex social networks in areas like epidemiology. Now, we all know that spreading of COVID or Mpox has something to do with the human behavior, and if you would go back to the COVID era and try to understand, of course, you would be 2 years younger from now, or maybe 4 years when it first emerged. So when you would look at these aspects, the first case in India was reported in Kerala, and this person actually, kind of came to the state, went to different places, to the railway station, then from his home, from his home to other friends, and kind of spread the disease. Same happened with other people. Now, this computational model of the spread of disease helps to understand or helps to predict the way this disease would spread. Prediction model would be important. So these types of computation models to understand the epidemiology of a particular disease would help the policymakers, would help the governments, or would help the interventionists to be prepared for emergencies, health emergencies. So this would be something very important. Now, again, if you would maybe look at a disease, this disease of chikungunya or dengue. Now, how this would spread at a particular season. So seasonality becomes an important aspect. Now, collective behavior at community and individual level would be stop the multiplication of the larvae. Now, if you assess it in a particular situation, predict and prepare a model. If I we'd be able to access last 10 years data of malaria infection, malarial deaths, and malarial recoveries. Maybe I can predict it for the next 5 years, that what is the next aspect that would be covered, whether it would increase, decrease, or would be eliminated. So this type of analysis would be helpful. Again, for one of the non-communicable diseases, social network analysis, this can be used for behaviors like suicide, the social withdrawal. So number of people I am interacting on a daily basis would gradually reduce to maybe 1 or 2, and then probably I'll be predisposed to suicidal tendencies. So this is very important. The most important, interesting, and the domain that is being covered by people is gamification and behavioral change, wherein you can gamify certain habits, certain behaviors, certain productive things, and you bring it for change in the entire behavior or learning aspects or cognitive aspects of people. Now, these are few examples which I've already covered, but how would you use machine learning and AI in behavior? So these are certain things that, that came to my mind, and I've jotted them down. Important would be AI in behavioral diagnostics, where you diagnose people for it is an autism spectrum disorder, or maybe behavioral disorder, or maybe common mental disorders. Emotion detection using AI, wearable devices to detect emotions. Then behavioral genetics, how the transcriptomics data can be used to predict the predisposition to stress or depression or anxiety or suicidal tendencies. Now, mental health, I've covered most of it, but looking at the last one, impact of music therapy and mood and anxiety. Now we know that music changes that. So you bring in your pieces of music put them into maybe an app or put them into some sort of package or a module and give it to me and see the effect on my behavior or mood. So these are already the domains that I've already covered, and you bring in your components of imagination to it and bring in the feasibility and practicality issues. Now, I've not answered to this question, but I'll tell you how and where to conduct experiments. First is when you people design your experiments or you design your studies, you have to collaborate with somebody who's working in these domains, somebody who is a psychiatrist or a neuropsychologist or a psychologist or a clinical psychologist. Without them, you cannot conduct experiments on humans. If you develop a prototype, which means when it comes to behavior and social sciences, you definitely are interacting with people, which means you definitely have to be collaborating with somebody. So this is an important why I did not answer this question in my upcoming slides is you have to identify, you have to collaborate with a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a neuropsychologist or a clinical psychologist. And what type of intervention are you giving? Is it just observational that you're just observing? Or is it something that you develop a prototype and put that person into their experiment? Okay, one is your observation, one is your experiment. Observation is something that you just observe. Say, for example, you're accessing my data, you're observing based on my WhatsApp chat, whether I am sad or maybe WhatsApp statuses, whether I'm sad, happy, or angry. This has nothing to do with you are not intervening, you're just observing and putting in your some, learning programs, and you're putting some AI-based assessments and predicting it. When you conduct an experiment, which means you're developing a prototype, asking an individual to wear it or to follow a particular program, which means you ask me not to eat an apple that day, but to eat an orange. So you're making me eat something or you're making me do something. So that would be a sort of intervention that you're giving to me. And for this, students are not entitled to do all these things. So you have to be trained under somebody, and under somebody's supervision, you have to conduct that experiment. Specifically, under a trained psychiatrist, psychologist, clinical psychologist, or a neuropsychologist. Why? Because this is something to do with human behavior. Humans, you're interacting with humans, you're contacting them, you're asking them the details of their personal life. And you have to now either access their data, already available data, or you are making them wear something, see something. Now, for this, collaboration is fine. The most important thing is you have to take ethical clearance. You have to be ethically very sound because you don't want to harm anybody. That's a thumb rule of being ethical. Do no harm. That's the first important thing that you're supposed to do. So when you design your experiments, when you conduct your experiments, now you know how to do because you already have a protocol for it. You collaborated with somebody and you're doing it somewhere. One is you do it in their settings, as in you call in people. If I have to work on neurodevelopmental delay children, we call in people and we observe, or we ask them to kind of maybe have a module or a mobile app to, or a gamification app to assess their attention time span. Again, I've collaborated with a psychologist. I have a protocol in place, prototype in place. I've gamified the entire process. And I know I need to assess their attention time span. But can I really conduct this experiment just by sitting at my home? No. I need to take ethical clearance. I need to put in people in a controlled setting where I can just observe. Okay. Or I access their data. They do it at their home. I access their data and analyze it. So these three domains are important as to where you conduct your experiments. So by addressing these three domains and collaborating with any of these four people and collecting the data, and then experimenting with it would help you to successfully prepare your entire protocol. Now, when I address all these, the most important thing is you have to be like those people, not neurodevelopmentally, but you have to feel like them so that you are sensitive to them, so that you're sensitive to the information that you're getting. So do no harm, you're not harming them, but using that information derived from them is not just for IRIS or ISEF, but as a human being, the most important thing that is there is be sensitive, because you will be interacting with real-time humans. When you would do plant experiments, you are not, you know, uh, doing experiments on emotions. You're not doing experiments on people who are into some conditions. So you have to be sensitive to how and where to conduct your experiments. That's a thumb rule that you follow in behavioral and ethical sciences. As an anthropologist, I've been to like almost every every state of the country. I've interacted with almost 18 to 20 communities of different vulnerabilities, tribal populations, people with suicide, people with depression, people with heart failure. And that is where the component of being sensitive to these people has come. Now, again, when you would develop and design your protocols, synopsis, you, you first address a global challenge, place it in the local context, bring your innovative component, bring in your solutions to that problem, put in your innovation to that problem. These would be the evidence formative assessment domains. You collaborate with somebody, make somebody your mentor where you can actually do it. Now you do not do for, let us say, I want to experiment on neurodevelopmental delay children. I would not go and collaborate with somebody who's working on plant sciences or maybe who's working on core genetics. I would want to collaborate with somebody who is a neuropsychiatrist and is able to assess these domains. Or maybe I want to work on epilepsy. So I would want to collaborate with a psychiatrist or neurologist. So you have to know whom to collaborate with. Then when you design, do no harm, be sensitive, do your experiment, whether it is observational or experimental, collect the data, analyze the data successfully, whether it is on a small sample size or a big sample size, and bring in your meaningful results. With that, I would like to close.